More than a year has passed since April 2022, the month during which the Lebanese government formally signed a staff-level agreement with the International Monetary Fund. Little has changed over the past year. The Lebanese currency continues to plunge to all-time record lows. The Lebanese population continues to fall deeper into poverty. This all can be traced back to a conscious political choice that the country's ruling class has made to privilege certain interests over others. This has been reflected in the way that negotiations with the IMF have been going. This paper aims to inform the Lebanese population about what has been happening, how these negotiations have been developing, and how the agency has been stripped away from them in deciding their own choice. It is not a surprise that there has been a general consensus that an IMF program is the only viable way that the Lebanese population, the Lebanese society, can get out of its current misery. This political class, however, does not seem to agree. In this paper, we find that this political class designed a negotiating team that is set to fail. Not only this, but we also find that the public discourse that has been charged with bad faith anti-IMF narratives has been one of the main obstacles standing in the face of the likely materialization of the program. The Lebanese population has been fed lies in order to maintain the status quo that very much stands against their own interests.
We focus first on a structurally flawed negotiation between the IMF and an official Lebanese negotiating team that does not represent the broader Lebanese political class. Lebanon's negotiating team, on paper, includes a number of key economic policymakers, but the team in practice seems mainly to consist of Deputy Prime Minister Saada al-Shami. Shami gets generally positive reviews for his competence and his seriousness, but he lacks the apparent backing of the rest of the government and of Lebanon's broader political class. So that means that the economic recovery plan and the assorted draft legislation that Shami's team has advanced lacks broader political buy-in. This is a particular problem when the action moves to Parliament, where now members of Parliament are being asked to advance reform legislation and what's sometimes called the Saada al-Shami plan, in which they have very little investment.
The second main reason Lebanon's IMF talks have stalled has to do with the toxic political discourse and public discourse that has been dominated by powerful interest groups, such as the Lebanese banking sector and political parties. These powerful interest groups have led a propaganda-like campaign on the Lebanon's political media. This political media has been filled with commentary that is conspiratorial and speculative in order to spur disinformation and make sure that the Lebanese population does not have single clue about what is really taking place. There are too many anti-IMF narratives out there in the popular political media for us to mention in the course of this video. Some of the most significant have been relating to the issue of the depositors and the sanctity of the deposits. The issue here is a populist insistence on the protection of all deposits in the banking sector, be it those that have resulted from illicit enrichment, be it those that are large and have benefited from exorbitant interest rates in the banking sector, or those who are small. Essentially, this narrative stands against the likelihood of a banking structuring act that is fair and equitable and that is socially conscious, that reallocates the losses based on principles of accountability and fairness. It also aims to justify the use of public assets in the recovery of the private losses that have occurred in the banking sector. meaning that some of the public assets, such as our ports, such as our public lands, will be used in order to cover the large depositors' losses in the banking sector. Other narratives center around the ability of some kind of savior to come and save Lebanon from its current misery. The usual suspects of this would be the Gulf countries, who have traditionally come to the aid of the Lebanese political elite at multiple instances. However, given the scale of the current losses, any kind of aid that will float to Lebanon will only put a small dent into the huge level of the losses that we have. That runs the same for the other narrative related to the issue of the oil, the fact that if Lebanon's oil explorations are successful, that the money that will flow in as a result will save Lebanon from its economic demise. For similar reasons, this is not true and is only a distraction from the reality. Perhaps the most important anti-IMF narrative has been one that is related to the fact that the country is beyond it, the country is recovering. And we hear that in the national media, we hear it said by politicians, and we hear it even in private circles. That the country is recovering, there's a new equilibrium that is reached, and that we are at a point where the economy does not really require any kind of help from the IMF, or any kind of reform for that sake. This certainly is not true. The Lebanese economy, although might look like it is recovering in a way that creates small bubbles of affluence and small bubbles of normalcy in a broader sea of misery.
So the reality is that unless there's some course change, Lebanon is not going to have an IMF program. Lebanon's political leaders regularly profess their commitment to reform and to reaching an IMF program, but their actions say otherwise. What the country is getting instead is a non-IMF alternative, what some people have called the shadow plan. So this shadow plan is premised centrally on shifting the burden of financial sector losses to small depositors and to the country's unbanked through the lirification of dollar deposits. But then what it means for the broader economy is that Lebanon's economy will remain unproductive. It will be increasingly cash-based, which will encourage tax evasion and other illicit behavior. Human capital will erode. Inequality will deepen. Lebanon's poor will live on remittances and aid, and the country's state will wither into almost nothing. And apparently, this shadow plan could work, sort of. It could clean up banks' balance sheets, stabilize the economy at some new low equilibrium, but all of this at a really terrible social cost. And this isn't a warning about some grim future. Lebanon is more than 3 years into the shadow plan. It's already happening.
Not all is lost in Lebanon's current stalled talks with the IMF. There's a lot that can still be done. This would center around two vital issues. The first is the issue of communication, and the second is the issue of accountability. On communication, it is vitally important that reformist elements in government, civil society actors, the IMF, and journalists and those who are in the public sphere and care about the economic well-being of the country, to tell people what's happening, to center them as essential interlocutors in the current state of events, in order for them to build the necessary public pressure that can drive these reforms forward and reclaim the agency of their own economy. Secondly, on the issue of accountability, The current lawsuits against Lebanese financial and political elites in European courts, but more importantly, in domestic courts, should be supported in order to threaten what these elites care most about: their power and their financial well-being. It is only through an effort that centers the Lebanese population back as a central force in the negotiations with the IMF, that informs it and gives it a seat at the table, as well as an accountability track that holds those who have committed financial crimes against this society accountable, that an economic recovery in this country is likely.